What up, party people? It is Adoragata Games coming at you live. We following that other adventurer that we followed back in that other story. What's in the name? Yeah, go back, check that shit out, come back up in here. Or listen to this one, then go back. I don't care. Shit, do both of them. In the last one, Inara, the Stormcrow, was getting the job, and now she's doing the job. I'm overjoyed to bring this one out of the gate. In this one, it's like car crashes and explosions. Wait, it's a fantasy story, so it ain't none of that. But explosions and monsters and murders. Don't forget casual murders. This story is called End of the Line, written by Angela Granger. I'll see you at the end.
Skit was a city of shadow elves, rumored to shift in and out of the Shadow Barrens at the will of the city's current hereditary ruler. Reslin believed it would be a good place to situate a command center where he and his army could enter and leave the Prime at will. From the village rooftops, I surveyed the carnage of Skit. Reslin's army had gone from mere conquest to a system of annihilation. Towns that refused to surrender immediately were razed to the ground, and the remains often became reanimated corpses. When his army arrived, they were surprised to find that Skit was little more than a well-fortified castle belonging to a family known as Sintaithan that surrounded a handful of villages that subsisted primarily on cotton and silk farming and trading with a river town about 2 days' walk, outnumbering the defending centuries of soldiers 25-1. Reslin's troops effortlessly burned down the cotton and silk farms and drew a bloodbath of anyone who did not immediately surrender and convert. Though despite those odds, the Sintaithan defenders managed to kill or incapacitate 30% of his troops by the time it ended. As an archer, I managed to hide a few survivors in my demiplane who fled at the onset of the battle and transported them to Fortress Bladestorm, a fortified armory near Heroes Landing that had been established by Kip's Cracklineers to process refugees of Reslin and Maddox's conquests. It was also rumored to train in asymmetrical warfare. To say my duties as the Stormcrow, one of the Morgan's harbingers of death, kept me busy here would be a gross understatement. Although the direction of death had subsided to perpetual background noise in my head. My last few days were spent herding over 200 fatally wounded shadow elves, kinku, humans, goblinoids, orcs, and dwarves of both Skit and Reslin's armies to the Morgan stronghold in the Shadow Barrens. For those who did not decide to make the final request of me, I summoned a murder of crows to escort them directly to the Citadel of Gloom. Right now, I was here mostly for the remnant survivors and the wounded still hovering between life and death. If I was seen alone, I was given a wide berth by anyone. At the moment, direction of death was telling me that another one was close to passing. I pulled the hood of my shadecloth mantle over my head and closed the fasteners across my chest before donning my crow mask and followed the incessant tug. In minutes, I spotted Reslin's raiders, an elite cadre of necromancers, enchanters, rogues, and fighters, whose job was to collect and recruit or dispatch any survivors and loot any magical items they found. Their current orders were to bring all magical keys and jewelry to Major Fish, the commanding officer of the assault. They started patrolling the destroyed homes and shops. In case you were wondering how I would know such details like command structure and overall objectives of Reslin's or Grambling Maddox's military units, there are not many things that could detect nor stop me if I am inclined to go into an officer's quarters and read through their orders, or even perform the more traditional scrying, if the mood strikes me. And if I'm going to be anywhere near a battlefield, the mood often strikes me to obtain such information. Also, the dead talk and my sometimes annoying habit of being willing to converse and occasionally grant final requests is extremely relevant to the events of today. The platoon known as Reslin's Raiders marched in a loose formation to each house in succession. The sergeant in charge was a heavily armed orange-skinned hobgoblin wearing an open-faced helm and a black surcoat with a red flaming skull emblazoned on the front and back over a chest plate of banded mail. He was accompanied by a human spellcaster dressed in Reslin's military uniform of a black and red patterned robe that also had a flaming skull on the shoulder. 2 scouts in studded leather also wore the same style of surcoat. This emblazoned surcoat served as their specialized uniform, as all of them wore to distinguish them from the regular units. Reslin's raiders had developed a fairly efficient process of looting. One scout, a human based on the visual appearances, checked the entrance door and the first floor windows at the front, while the other scout, also a hobgoblin, examined the side door, windows, or, if any were present, cellars and outhouses or ice boxes. After examining and unlocking them, if necessary, the first scout signaled and 2 of the other uniformed troopers entered with weapons drawn and readied. They in turn did a sweep of the house and about 2 minutes later exited, usually with something they found, and 3 more troopers went inside. The second scout and the half-orc trooper, wearing a bronze chestplate with studded leather leggings and vampiresses, would examine the items as they were brought out to examine. Sometimes the item was given to the human spellcaster. She was a wizard or sorcerer of some kind. The valuables were then sorted by a kinku or gnome into one of the chests stored in a mule-drawn coach they had looted. The hobgoblin sergeant saw me perched on the roof watching them and immediately became apprehensive.
Careful, death is nearby.
He warned his unit and immediately scanned the area. Both of our expectations were about to be fulfilled. The human scout found a 12-inch gem-covered box made of cobalt blue glass. After a cursory examination, he disarmed a fairly standard needle under the keyhole trap and brought it over to the human spellcaster. She frowned, looked it over cautiously, and tried to open it. There was a distinctive click sound, but she dropped the box too late to avoid the trap. There was a piercing loud whistle and pop sound as a firecracker detonated to shatter the glass box. A mix of acid and fire sprayed out to douse the magician and splash both the human scout and hobgoblin sergeant who was watching. The sergeant cursed as several pieces of glass grazed the right side of his face. Droplets of acid sizzled on his surcoat and armor and dissipated, leaving behind pockmarks.
"Why didn't you check for traps?"
he growled as he yanked off his leather gauntlet to pull out the shards of glass, even as he moved over to the spellcaster woman.
"I did,"
the human replied, quickly wiping away the acid and pulling out the shards of glass embedded in the back of his hands that he had thrown up to shield his face.
"I removed the poison needle from that device myself. I can't see,"
the woman cried out as she tried to wipe away the acid coating her face, even as her robes burned. Based on bone-white acid burns on her skin and her clothes that were turning dust gray, as it was probably exit acid. It was originally created by a taxonomist to become even more caustic if blood or water was added, as it ate away tissue and soft metals, but it was non-reactive to bone, stone, and hard metals. Someone got the idea to employ it as a weapon, and since Ender Reslin's army had a tendency to use acid-laced weapons against heavily armed troops and giants, the irony was not lost on me that acid was now being used against them. Suddenly, a kinku soldier fell over as 3 barbed crossbow bolts tore through their backs, shredding through the chain mesh armor worn.
"Over there!"
The sergeant pointed to a pile of wood. In moments, the entire unit delivered a volley of arrows and crossbow bolts.
"Heinrich, you and Zim verify."
The sergeant ordered a dwarf trooper and pointed to the other hobgoblin scout.
"Dantrag, scout the area."
Next, he pointed to the half-orc woman.
"Vaughn, see what you could do for Vera and Bluefeather. The rest, pair up and check each house. If you find any survivors, kill them."
The half-orc Vaughn started cutting the crossbow bolts out of the downed kinku.